Marty had asked the question, uh, give us some examples of artists who were not known in their own lifetime and became famous. And I think the example I think that jumps to most people's minds is Van Gogh. And it's not true. Van Gogh was pretty well known in his lifetime. His brother, of course, worked for a major art dealer in Paris. Uh, he had roomed with Lautrec. Lautrec had a really good opinion of him, spoke up for him towards the end of his life. Um, he was good friends with Gauguin. Of course, they had famous falling out, but Gauguin admired his work. Bonnard, the post-impressionists, he was pretty well known. His work was not economically successful. He started to sell at the very end of his life, and he got good reviews at the very end of his life. And so, unfortunately, he did have really serious mental problems, and when he died, there's some speculation now he was actually shot and didn't commit suicide, and that's a little bit mysterious there. But anyway, so he's pretty well known. The work is very valuable today. It wasn't valuable when he died, but that's kind of a different question, valuation. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. I said to Susan O'Hory, my partner, I said, this is basically, the dogs are barking. This is basically a myth that you don't really see artists who were not fairly well known in their lifetime who then become famous later on. And she pointed out to me that there are outsider artists, people who come from disadvantaged groups, African Americans, people who were stuck in situations of dire poverty, who were kind of on the outside of society. Many outsider artists are people who have serious mental problems. Even with outsider artists, usually there's a degree of recognition while they're alive. There are some outstanding exceptions, but those really are exceptions to the rule. For most people, if you don't have a degree of recognition during your lifetime, the chance of you being recognized as an artist after you've passed away is really not good. So this isn't something we should plan upon. And the mindset of, oh, I'm just not recognized or I'm out of my time, I think is not a healthy way to approach your work. You do want your work to be, it doesn't have to be economically successful, but you do want your work to be kind of engaged with the public, some type of public. You want people to have a genuine interest in your work while you're alive. And that's going to give you a much better indication that it would then preserve on and continue to have some significance after your death. When I wrote back to Marty initially, I said, actually, it's quite the opposite. Many artists who are pretty well known during their lifetime fall into obscurity, and the value of their work crashes, and many of their works even will be lost during that time period. And there are many examples of this. Artists of the second and third tier, good artists, but not really, really blue chip artists, top artists. Even some very famous artists in big collections, their work falls out of fashion, and there's a period of time in which they become insignificant. And this goes back a long way. One person this happened to was Botticelli. Botticelli was always a little odd as a painter, and his work was really, it wasn't taken very seriously. It wasn't being destroyed wholesale, but he really wasn't considered to be a great Renaissance painter. And then one critic championed his work in the 1800s, and interest in it was revived then. And so now he's very well thought of. This is a piece by the man who I would refer to as my master. I worked for him pretty steadily for about 12 years, Isaac Witkin. And Isaac Witkin's work now is kind of in the trough. I was looking at some valuations of his pieces. I looked at some valuation of George Rickey's work because I was kind of curious, what can you get one of these things for? Because I knew that he was a bit on the outs. And you can get a Rickey maquette, probably about this size, functional piece, you know, $10,000, $15,000. You can get one of Isaac's pieces, not this one, but some of his nicer work, smaller pieces, either unique pieces or maquettes for larger pieces, $1,500, $2,000, really, really much less than they were going for at the end of his life. And that's really not at all unusual, that valuation falls off. So this is kind of a grim assessment. But I want to talk about another way of looking at works of art, old works of art, and it's a little bit more positive. I think it's a little bit more interesting too. So what is the life of a piece of art? Okay, so this is a piece by Pat Lang, and some of you may remember Pat. She passed away a few years ago, and after she passed away, her children were disposing of some of her work, and I was able to pick this piece up. I have a few paintings, a few drawings. I was very fond of Pat, and she, as a painter, she had done fairly well for quite a few years. And then her work kind of fell out of fashion, and there was an economic crash, and it didn't really recover its value. And that happens to living artists, that they'll be doing well, and then, you know, their work falls out of fashion, and they have difficulty selling. But this is a sculpture that she made towards the end of her life. I was very fond of it, and I got this piece, and I'm keeping it. So I kind of saved it from the tip. I saved it from being thrown out. And a lot of work, you know, over time is destroyed. And we benefit from the editing of time, so that when we look at the artworks of the past, we tend to have a rather distorted view of how good it was back then, because the bad stuff is all gone. It's all gone through that trough and been destroyed. And so, you know, one worries about that a little bit as an artist. I always pity the silversmith and the goldsmith who makes a wonderful piece of art, beautiful piece of jewelry, and then the price of silver or gold goes up and it gets melted down. This is why I worry a lot about my bronze pieces that I've made. I used to do a lot of bronze work. I've got some very large bronze pieces. And I have a horrible feeling that when I die, they're all going to be heading for the smelter. So, you know, that's kind of a negative thing. But I'm going to keep Pat's piece around, and I'm going to take care of it. And then when I pass on, I'm not sure what's going to happen to it, but it gives it a shot. Kept it out of the tip. The chance of Pat's name enduring is really poor. Certainly her sculpture, she had no reputation, so her name enduring is really poor. The piece enduring, there's a better chance there, I think, that the work will go on, even if her name doesn't. And in a way, it's much more important that the piece survive than your name survive. And there is where I feel there's more of a chance of, I was an obscure artist, what is the fate of my work? Well, the fate of your reputation is probably pretty much sealed. You know, you're not going to get famous. But the fate of your work is a little bit more, we're not sure. If it can kind of make it through that trough of time and kind of find a niche somewhere, then, you know, it may very well endure through time. I'm going to switch the piece out here and take a look at this. Okay. So this is a really, really beautiful piece of ceramics. I love this piece. It's blue on white. It was made in Vietnam. And we know when it was made. And this is actually, I'll show you that label there. This is from a marine excavation at the port of Hoi An in Vietnam. And it was done by the Vietnamese government. And it was Oxford or Cambridge, I can't remember who. But they excavated 250,000 pieces out of this wreck. And there's still pieces on the wreck. And there had been pieces that had kind of been pirated off the wreck for many years before then. So the total number might be around 350, 400,000 pieces in this wreck when it went down that have been preserved. And this is actually an interesting area for collecting now, is the marine archaeology of ceramics. So we know that it was made in Vietnam. We know it's a copy of Ming pottery that was made at that time. And we know that the ship went down during the childhood of Henry VIII, so at the beginning of the Tudor era. And I'm going to pull back out here. Sorry, that's a really very crude way to do things here. Sorry. I'll pull back out here though. Getting my own shot. So this work is very prized in Japan for using in tea ceremony because the calligraphy is very crude. See, these are just little squiggles. In the original Ming pieces, these were flowers, garlands. You know, there's a Chinese character here. The person who made it might not have even known the Chinese characters. Probably did. But the people who were making this, making thousands of pieces, hundreds of pieces a day, really poor, probably just getting by, doing better than most people, but just getting by. We have absolutely no idea of the names of these people. But the work is beautiful. It's a beautiful piece of art, really it is. And the looseness of it, you know, and I'm not going to romanticize poverty here, but the way that it's done very directly and very quickly, you know, gives it a certain quality that I think is really beautiful. And then the glaze is deteriorated through being in salt water for hundreds of years. It's hundreds of years old. But that also gives it a certain charm for me. I use these pretty often. And when I use these bowls, you know, I believe in a very genuine sense, just as we speak of well, I own a Larry Bell, I own a Pat Lang, so also I own this person's work. I have a little piece of this person that I eat out of. And I have a degree of connection. I don't understand their society. I don't think of the cultural things so much. I don't think that's absolutely necessary. There's an element of art which transcends particulars of culture. And I feel a genuine connection to the people who made this work when I use it. And so in a sense, when I use these bowls, when I see these bowls, when I eat out of these bowls, drink out of these bowls, the person is alive. And I think that's sort of at the root of the question, what are the chances that an artist's work would become well known after they should pass away? I have no idea of this person's name. I can imagine their circumstances were probably pretty rough. But they live when I use the work. for me and for anybody else who experiences the piece. And so that, I think, is quite possible. Much more likely than that your persona and your particulars should go on with that. I'm going to bring out a few other pieces here. Continue this on. This one's by Warren McKenzie. Warren McKenzie is a very famous ceramic artist. For many years he wouldn't use a chop, but he started to use a chop. He's got an interesting story about him and the way he used to sell his work and what he had to do when eBay came along. This is by Eddie. Eddie passed away last year. Oh, Warren McKenzie passed away last year too, actually. They both passed away last year. And Eddie's work, I love Eddie's work. I bought Eddie's work at the sales at the school. Eddie was a student. He's like one of you fake students. He's really pretty much an artist. And he came to be in the community and sell his work and make his work in the community. I liked Eddie a lot. And this bowl to me reminds me of the surf in wintertime in the Atlantic Ocean. The gray, light, and I think it's just very beautifully formed, very nicely done. Warren McKenzie was a great ceramicist, and he used to use no chop, and he used to sell his work at his studio. I think it was in Minnesota. Yeah, I think it was in Minnesota. And he would just have the place open and people could come in, and they were pretty cheap. He liked the idea of just being able to make a living, according as he taught too, but just being able to make a living and to have that piece available to somebody for, like, say $50, $60, pretty cheap. And so, but what happened was, when eBay came along, people would come in and they'd pay the money and they'd buy the stuff and they'd post it on eBay for twice as much, and he started to get really ticked off. So he started to sell through galleries at the end of his life and use a chop mark. And this came from a gallery in Berkeley, and so it's a very late piece. And it's still very cheap. It was under $100, and it's a beautiful bowl. It's just great for soups and stews. It's just remarkable. And so I'm really glad I have a Warren McKenzie, and I'm really glad that I have one of Eddie's pieces. And of course, having known Eddie, I never knew Warren McKenzie, although you kind of know somebody through their work, right? You know something about them by what they make. But having known Eddie, it also has this nice emotional content. And I have his work around my kitchen, both on display and for regular use. And so Eddie is dead, but in a sense, there's a first death of the body, and then there's kind of a cultural death. And when you see one society trying to eradicate another, that's trying to bring about a big cultural death. That's a bad thing. You really don't want to do that. It's like at one point there was a saying, save the man and kill the Indian. So, but he's still alive. They're still alive in that when I experience their work, I experience them. Okay. So this is one of my pieces, right? I mean, I do quite a bit of ceramic work that I throw out here on the porch. It's a real mess, but I really like to throw sometimes, and I make a lot of ceramic pieces, and it's nice glaze. Obviously, American Studio pottery, it's kind of busy. Of all my work, drawings, performances, installations, sculpture, the work which is most likely probably to survive my death are my ceramics. But not by my name, but just by their existence. I posted on Facebook recently and I said, it's the only work I do that anybody buys. And then somebody who had bought one of my sculptures posted and said, well, yeah, that's not quite true. And I was like, oh, yeah. He was an artist, and he had bought one of my sculptures many years ago. But the popularity and the accessibility of my ceramics is much greater than my pure sculpture. So there's a little bit of anxiety in that. I don't think the one erases the other, or that I would want to stop making one because of the other. But, you know, I think this is what is most likely to go on. Yeah. Now this is a strange piece, and it gets into another question I'm not going to go into too deeply, but this is a wood and plaster and paint piece. The base is mine. So I incorporated this in a piece of sculpture, but I purchased this on eBay, and it was really sort of like Egyptian sculpture, and I was like, maybe. But as I've looked into it, and I've looked at it more carefully, my suspicion, it's just a suspicion, is that this is actually real. Obviously not a great piece of art. You know, this would be something that a person who is middle class, lower middle class Egyptian would be buried with. But this style of decoration, it had things sticking into it at one point. The pigments and the plaster and the general form of the wood carving all actually check out to probably be the real thing. Of course, I don't know. It could be fake. Buy anything on eBay, it's a definite possibility it could be fake. But here again, it's sort of like, why would you bother? If you're going to fake something that's worth more money. But it has a certain persona to it that I really love, and I really enjoyed having it and putting it into one of my pieces. It doesn't matter that I don't know who made it. And the funny thing about Egyptian art is that I don't believe, even up into the age of the Ptolemies, 500 years before Christ, up to really the time of Christ, I don't believe the Egyptian artists ever signed their work. And some of them were just total masters of what they did. But they are, their names, their histories are totally lost to us. Some of the villages where artists lived have been excavated, so they know what types of lives they lived, and they kind of lived the life of an upper middle class craftsman, which was pretty hard, but it was better than being a farmer. But whoever made it, I really like it, and it's just got this certain feel to it that I connect with. And so, to sum up, I would say you want to try to develop those connections while you're alive. There's some chance that those connections will form over time if you can get through that trough of time. But it's much more likely that your work will be understood or related to after you die, if it is while you're still alive. So that's it for this little talk. I hope it was interesting. As a maker and a collector of art, I have some insight into this, and a person who has seen what has happened to the career of other artists. I have some insight into this, and so that's what I wanted to share with you today. Yes, and I hope that it was entertaining, and we shall see.